The whole world currently see China through a lens of perpetual, linear growth and as the inevitable future superpower of the world, as it has the largest population, largest manufacturer, and combined soon with the largest economy and ever-growing stronger military. Their growth in the last 40 years has been remarkable. But why only now, after 2,000 years since the country known as China first came together from the warring states? The inevitable rise of China concept is the same myth that the West was obsessed with previously, firstly with the Soviet Union and then Japan with their economic miracle. Half of China live inland and extremely poor compared to their coastal counterparts. The three coastal regions dominate the actions of the Chinese nation. There are three parts to China. Northern China is the political core, Central China is the economic core, and Southern China see themselves as separate from the northern rulers. All the three main regions in China have little in common. China has one time zone due to in 1949 the Communist Party chairman, Mao Zedong, decided that all of China was to use Beijing time to promote cohesion. It previously had 5 time zones. China as one big and united country is a myth. Chinese success over the past 3 decades has been thanks to the American-led system. The Americans removed Japan as a serious threat to China. Before the Americans joined World War II, the Chinese already had lost the war against Japanese forces and were trying to hang on. The Japanese held every part of Chinese territory that made China economically and politically viable. China only regained its sovereignty when Japan surrendered to the Americans in 1945. Japan's inclusion into the Bretton Woods network in the 1950s ceased Japan's interest in China. Now that the Japanese had full access to global resources and markets and no need to take China's. With the Japanese threat over, China finally concluded its own long-running civil war to become a unified nation. In addition, for the first time in over 400 years, no European colonial threat either. For the first time, China had complete control over their economy. The Chinese joined the Bretton Woods system in the 1970s, giving them access to the global marketplace and allowed China to use its cheap labor to manufacture goods to be sold for their profit only and not any colonial power. There are 3 big risks for China. Firstly, its financial system. The Chinese government controls what its citizens can do with their savings. And instead of being allowed various investment options compared to other countries, their citizens' savings are used to sponsor government goals. There are only a very few banks in China, all of which are significantly large and follow the same mandate to deploy bank deposits to support lending to the economy as a whole to maximize full employment. The banks have access to very cheap deposits and therefore their funding costs are extremely low for a developing nation. The Chinese impose a quota on bank lending that must be made every month, following the same system the Japanese used throughout the 1950s to the 1980s for their perceived miracle economy before it became overextended and turned more into speculation rather lending for productive means, and eventually crashed. Since then, Japan's economy has been stagnant. Secondly, its demographics. China's one-child policy and its strict enforcement slashed the birth rate, and stopping an expected extra 300 million births and preventing the overpopulation risk the Chinese leaders at the time dreaded. It has led to a huge gender imbalance where Chinese prefers sons to daughters and having abortions if pregnant with a girl. The birth rate dropped by half from its introduction in the 1970s and now presents China with a significant problem. The Chinese call it the 4-2-1 problem, 4 grandparents to 2 parents to 1 child. China is not yet wealthy enough for a state welfare system. Within a single generation, China has a huge demographic disaster coming its way, worse than Europe and Japan. For China, going forward, huge amounts of young workers will not appear as they have to be born first. It takes a whole generation for these births to become productive workers. Even by eliminating the one-child policy, it would take a radical mindset change to encourage hard-working Chinese workers to have more children and will not be easy or quick to implement. The third big risk for China is its dependence on the USA. The USA system facilitated most of China's success over the past 3 decades, With no external threats, it has become unified and with access to raw materials, a manufacturing powerhouse able to export its goods safely all over the world. For the Chinese, 15% of China's GDP depends upon direct exports and supply chains, with the final destination is the United States. If this trade access is blocked, the Chinese economy would suffer an economic depression, which could be even worse if US allies follow suit and also block access. As 1/3 of Chinese economic activity is export-driven, the Chinese trade-orientated regions such as Shanghai and Hong Kong would suffer the most. China is now the world's largest importer of nearly every commodity. The oil that China requires is shipped from the Middle East or Africa and must pass by hostile nations such as India, Thailand, Singapore, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Taiwan, and without the American security guarantee of the sea lanes, all of which have the naval means and cruise missiles to block the transportation, whilst China itself lacks the naval ocean ability to protect their supplies. Everything that made the Chinese economy a success is fully dependent upon an international environment wholly maintained by the USA that could be taken away in an instant. As China growth story unwinds, the biggest winners will be Mexico and other countries in Southeast Asia for manufacturing. Output also from places such as Brazil and Africa that have benefited from the USA-led order will also be at risk. Only countries with strong ties with the USA will continue to prosper. By 2040, the USA remains so powerful thanks to its unique geography and strong demography, as China and Europe suffer due to the headwinds of their demographic disaster.